Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together.
All right, everybody, welcome back to GenX Classic Sports. I'm your host, Sean Enos, and today this is going to be episode 36, and we're diving into the career of one of the most iconic, probably polarizing, and unforgettable athletes of the 80s and 90s. This is the second guy we've covered as part of our Great Athletes series. Bo Jackson was the first, and this guy's name is Deion Sanders. Now, the whole reason this series came about is because I was looking at a list that ESPN put out about the greatest athletes of the 20th century. Deion and Bo Jackson were both ranked in the 70s, and I knew that was just way off. So I decided to cover some guys that were done wrong by that list, if nothing else. And so Bo was our first, and now we're going to talk a little bit about Deion Sanders. So for Gen X, Deion really, he wasn't just a player. He was a cultural phenomenon like a few other guys only were. He wasn't. There was only one Michael Jordan, but Deion was on that next level right below him for a variety of reasons. Mostly because he wasn't only just great at football, he was also better than average at Major League Baseball, if you ask me, in a lot of different ways. Very flashy, a lot of swagger. But here's the thing, for all of you that are old men wanting people to get off your grass and all that, here's the thing that I think all of us have come to the conclusion of. If you back it up, it's not bragging and it's not swagger and it's not false, a false sense of ability. If you back it up, then no one can say anything, and Deion backed it up. So Deion Sanders was born in Fort Myers, Florida, and even in high school, apparently it was obvious that he was going to be a standout athlete. He played baseball, he played football, he played basketball. The interesting thing about him, I try to give you something every time we do this that you may not have known, and I bet a lot of you like me assumed that Deion ran track in high school, but he did not. They didn't have a track program at his high school, so apparently he didn't run track until he got to Florida State. And if you don't believe me, there's a great video somewhere on YouTube of Deion talking about when they taught him how to run. I believe it was the 200, and they told him, yeah, when you get into this area of the track, kick in your speed. And said, I was looking at it, and we were on a track on a football field. And so I said, oh, so when I get to the goal post, kick it in, huh? And they said, yeah. And so he was like, yeah, I know how to handle that. And so, yeah, he ran track in college after not running it in high school. At Fort Myers High School, North Fort Myers High School in Florida, Deion was all-state in football, baseball, and basketball. That's a pretty interesting trifecta. And he was drafted out of high school by the Kansas City Royals in the 1985 Major League Baseball draft. He just chose not to pursue professional baseball at that moment. He went on to Florida State on his football scholarship. So at Florida State, he dropped basketball and he just stuck with football, baseball, and running track, like I said. On the football field, we all know that he was a lockdown corner. That was his job. He shut down, half the field, so to speak, and he shut down the other team's best receiver always. And so teams just didn't throw his way. One of the interesting statistical things about him is sometimes his numbers don't look as gaudy as you might remember, and then you have to remind yourself, well, that's because they didn't throw at him, period. Of course, his nickname was Prime Time, and that pretty much picked up at Florida State because of his ability and his flair for the dramatic and for the outstanding plays that he seemed to always make. And he played outfield on the baseball team. That's should be obvious because of his speed, and like I said, he ran track. So as I've said, Deion did not run track in high school, but it didn't stop him from doing another one of those Deion, Bo Jackson type of things, this being specifically the Deion thing that preceded another Deion thing we're going to talk about. Let me take you back to May 16th, 1987. I believe Deion was a sophomore at Florida State. And just as luck would have it, Florida State was in Columbia, South Carolina for both the Metro Conference Championships in baseball and in track and field. At 3 o'clock, the baseball team was set to play Southern Mississippi. And track and field coach Dick Roberts had a track relay guy who came down with mono before this weekend. And he went to baseball coach Mike Martin and said, look, would it be possible that if you guys win at 3, or either way, but between 3 and 7:30 that night for the finals, win or lose, would it be possible if we could borrow Deion to run the relay for us in the 4x100 because my guy's out with mono? Keep in mind, Deion had never run track. And the baseball coach, Mike Martin, said, sure, I think that would be really an interesting thing, so no problem. So at 3 o'clock against Southern Mississippi in baseball, Deion went 1 for 4 with a double and a run scored, and the Seminoles won 5-1. That put them playing in the finals at 7:30 p.m. The track coach, Roberts, he then jogged over 200 yards or so over to the baseball field, and he gave Deion a track outfit. Now, he had other things to do, so he had to leave and go supervise his track people. So Deion got dressed in his track outfit, but he realized that he didn't know anything about handing off nor accepting a baton. And so baseball assistant coach Chip Baker had some experience with this. And right there beside the baseball stadium, in between games and before the track meet, assistant coach Chip Baker, he practiced handing off and receiving the baton with Deion and got him all prepped for this track meet. So Deion went over, and with just that little bit of preparation, he ran in the 4x100 with the Florida State team, and they finished second. And you think, well, that's not a very good ending. Well, not true, because remember, track's kind of a cumulative event with all the other different sports rolled into one championship. And so that second place finish actually propelled them into winning the overall track conference meet for that day. And so they became champions. The whole baseball team walked over to watch this happen. And in front of them, Deion got the second place finish. Now, Deion walked back across the parking lot, back to the baseball field, with the whole track team now joining to watch him play again at 7:30. Florida State played against Cincinnati in the finals, and Deion had a whole 15 minutes to change clothes and get ready for the baseball final. So here they play Cincinnati. Deion's playing, and it's a close game. And remember, this is the conference championship for the old Metro Conference. And in the bottom of the sixth, the game is tied 2-2. And who's at the plate? Yep, Deion. And Deion hit a 2-run double to left field to put the Seminoles up 4-2. Remember, that was in the bottom of the sixth. They went on to win the game 6-3 and therefore win that championship. So that's why and how Deion Sanders, from the research that I've looked up, he's the only player in NCAA history to win conference titles in two different sports on the same day. So among all the other things he did at Florida State on the football field and on the baseball field, add track to the list. And from what I remember, he went ahead and joined the track team for the season, the following season. So while at Florida State, he was there as a footballer from 1985 to 1988. He was a two-time All-American corner. That's his junior and senior years. He won the Jim Thorpe Award, which was the nation's, that's our college football's national award for the best defensive back in the country. He won that as a senior in 88. And that's all while he's still playing baseball and running track. And, you know, his calling card, and I'll try to find a video to post. His calling card was interceptions and running back, kickoffs, and punts, of course. That's where he really got his attention to the NFL. Some of his numbers at Florida State as a defensive back and a returner. He had 14 interceptions there in his career for 287 yards returned and 3 interception return touchdowns. He had 126 punt returns for 1,429 yards and 3 touchdowns doing that. And it's not just that he scored 6 touchdowns doing what he did. It seems like it was always when he did it in big games. He was a 2-time consensus All-American defensive back in 87 and 88. And like I said earlier, the Jim Thorpe Award winner, and his number 2 jersey was retired by Florida State later for football. On the baseball field at Florida State, he had a batting average for his career in 331, and he stole 27 bases just in 1987 as the center fielder for Florida State. So that's a pretty good year of being on base and stealing bases. So the 1989 NFL draft, it was one of the best NFL drafts of all time because of how many Hall of Famers were in it and all the famous names in it. That's the year, in case you forgot. We actually did an episode on this, and I don't remember. But it was the draft of 1989 was the one that Troy Aikman was the first pick taken by the Dallas Cowboys, number 1 overall. But Deion was actually picked 5th by the Falcons. And so immediately, Deion made an impact. In his very first game as a Falcon, rookie year, he returned a punt 68 yards for a touchdown. By that time, we're getting into the ESPN era of highlights, and so, of course, I'm sure that made plenty of highlights for the next 2-3 days on ESPN, and, of course, the crowd loved that. And, that kind of signaled Primetime's arrival into the NFL. And he quickly developed, by reputation and skill, as one of the best corner coverage men in the whole NFL. And he lined up right in dudes' faces, right in press coverage. And he was known for getting beat just a little bit on purpose so that the quarterback would go ahead and throw the ball. And then he would just use that amazing closing speed of his to close on the ball and get the pick or knock the ball down. He jumped passes, as they call it, a lot. And it made him almost impossible to scheme against, because he took away half the field and your best receiver normally. But he didn't just do that. Of course, he was also a return man and dangerous doing that, kickoffs, punts. And there's a stat somewhere, I have some notes, that he scored a touchdown by reception, by rush. He scored by fumble return. He scored by interception return. He scored by kickoff. And he scored by punt return. I think that's it. He scored 6 touchdowns in 6 different ways in the NFL. And I honestly don't know if anyone's ever done that before. And so the Falcons really weren't that good in the early 90s. And so Deion gave them this star power that they really needed. And if you'll remember, the Falcons had traditionally worn red helmets, and at some point they switched over to the black and white only, and Deion really embraced all that. He had the bandanas on under the helmet. He high-stepped into the end zone. I mean, he put on a show and was entertainment value for them on a team that wasn't always contenders, basically. Here's where Deion separated himself from most everybody around him. When he left Florida State, he, of course, got drafted to play Major League Baseball as well. And he debuted in the major leagues with the New York Yankees in 1989. Now, keep in mind, he was playing football. He had worked out a deal, and everybody knew this was going to have to be this way, with the Major League team that drafted him and the NFL team that drafted him. Those two teams were going to have to be aware of each other and his desire to play both sports. As a baseball player, no, Deion wasn't a Hall of Famer, but he didn't give it an honest shot because he was playing football. He had elite speed, but even by Major League standards, covered all that ground in the outfield. He was a base-stealing threat always, and, he's that guy on second base or first base even. You don't worry about when a ball hits the gap whether he's going to be able to score or not. That's a given. He did have an outstanding season in 92. By the time the Yankees and he had parted ways, he moved over to the Atlanta Braves, and we'll talk about what happened there. But in 92 with the Braves, he hit 304, and he stole 26 bases and led the major leagues in triples. So Think about the odds of making it in either the NFL or Major League Baseball. And lots of guys play minor league. I'm not saying it's an easy thing either, but a lot of guys did play minor league baseball plus one more sport and maybe even made it to the other sport's highest level. But Deion obviously made it in both. He wasn't the only guy to do it, and we'll eventually talk about all of them during that era. But I think you'll agree that he and Bo Jackson kind of cornered the market on being two-sport athletes in the 80s. Okay, so I'm not strictly going in chronological order, but let's go back to the 1992 era of Deion. So he had kind of gone back and forth with the Yankees on whether to play Major League Baseball or not. He ended up leaving and going to the Braves, and he's in the major leagues along with playing in the NFL. Okay, so he had worked this deal out. Now think about the postseason in Major League Baseball. It goes through September and into October, right in the almost dead middle of the football season by the time you get to the middle of October, early November. So he was really having conflict there. But think about it. He's playing with the Falcons and the Braves, so he had managed to negotiate at least his way into being into the same city. So in October of 1992, there's been documentaries on ESPN made about this, but it's one of the most unforgettable, events, feats, whatever you want to call it in sports history. But it kind of sums up all you need to know about old Prime Time and his confidence in playing two different sports. We're talking about October of 1992 when Deion managed to play in both an NFL game and a Major League Baseball playoff game in the very same week. So how did that happen? So keep in mind, you have to have the cooperation of both teams to do this, but here's kind of how it went. Both of his teams being in Atlanta, he'd worked out a deal where he could try to accomplish this, and he had his coach's blessings to try to do this. Two different demanding pro athlete schedules and one guy trying to do it all. So in October, the Braves were in the middle of the National League Championship Series, the old NLCS, against the Pittsburgh Pirates. So this is the postseason. Every pitch counts, right? Every out counts. At the same time, the Falcons, they were right in the middle of their regular season, where in a 16-game schedule, every victory counts. So here's kind of how it happened. So October the 9th, 1992, Sanders played in Game 3 of the NLCS for the Braves in Pittsburgh. He came in as a pinch runner, and he scored a run. The next day was the 10th. He flew to Miami to join the Falcons for their NFL game, which was played the next day on October the 11th. He played in the Falcons Sunday, October 11th. He played in the Falcons-Dolphins game, returning kickoffs, returning punts. Right after the game ended, he got on a private plane and he flew to Pittsburgh for Game 5, which was that same night. So that was October the 11th, 92, when both games were on the same day. Now, I told you there was controversy. There was, and you can go look at the ESPN documentary and get the full story. But basically, Bobby Cox was kind of mad at him, the manager for the Braves, for doing all this hopping around. And make of that what you will. Sounds like the team was fine. The organization was fine. Maybe the manager wasn't. So when he arrived in Pittsburgh, coming from Miami the same day, after all of that, Cox chose not to play him. He arrived in Pittsburgh. He did not play. He sat in the dugout the whole game due to, manager's decision. So how did it actually go? Well, with all this running around, Deion just wasn't there for looks. He was a legit contributor, hitting over 300 in the postseason, and did his thing on the base paths and whatnot. And the Braves went all the way to the World Series that year against the Blue Jays. So Deion hit .533 in the World Series. He was 8 for 15 at the plate with 4 runs scored and 5 stolen bases. That doesn't sound like a guy not focused to me. And he was obviously one of the Braves' most dangerous players. And even though the Braves lost the World Series ultimately to Toronto, just the whole memory of Deion juggling both of those things in the same week, in the same season, became kind of a defining story for his career. He wasn't good enough to play in both. He's good enough to play at them both sports at the highest level, highest level, same time, biggest moments kind of thing. And so he really got a lot of media attention. By 92, ESPN was most definitely ruling the sports airwaves. And so he got plenty of coverage. And so here we are 30 years later, still talking about it. If you get a chance, watch the ESPN documentary about it. Obviously, it was very well done. And, Bo is known for playing in the Pro Bowl and the Major League All-Star game back when the Pro Bowl meant something. And so that's an accomplishment no one else. That makes him a unicorn. And then Deion is a unicorn, in my opinion, for doing what he did with a postseason performance like he had, not just being there, batting over 500 in the postseason, and also being dominant on the football field when he was back and forth. So, yeah, for Gen Xers, yeah, that's something that we know the magnitude of how good of an accomplishment that was. So, after all of that, a couple years later, you get into 1994, if we're going chronologically, and Deion is leaving or left the Atlanta Falcons on a free agent contract, and he signed with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, then he turned in one of the best seasons ever for a defensive player. He had 6 interceptions and returned 3 of them for touchdowns. He won the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. And the thing that is always most important is he helped the 49ers go to the Super Bowl, a Super Bowl in which they won. That was Steve Young's Super Bowl after he took over for Joe Montana, and the 49ers won a Super Bowl that year with Deion picking off a pass in the NFC Championship game to help them get to their Super Bowl. I'm pretty sure that's the Super Bowl in which they beat the Chargers, but you can check me on that if I'm not right. And so after that one season, Deion made a big move, right? He had a 1-year deal in San Francisco. He needed a team. And who stepped to the plate? Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys with a record-breaking contract. If I remember correctly, the signing bonus alone was $12.99 million, and Deion signed with the Cowboys. And once again, he made a huge difference because the Cowboys won the Super Bowl the first year he was there. This would have been the year that Barry Switzer had taken over the previous year. Deion and the Niners beat the Cowboys in the playoffs to win the Super Bowl. Deion flips teams, goes to the Cowboys. Barry Switzer still in charge. The Cowboys returned to the Super Bowl, which was, I believe, Super Bowl 30. Not only did Deion play corner, but obviously he contributed as a punt returner. And for that season with the Cowboys, he played some wide receiver. And as a matter of fact, there is footage of him in that Super Bowl, which they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. Deion caught a deep pass down the middle from Aikman playing wide receiver. That was a really good play. And so by now, Deion's a household name. He's got commercials, endorsements, the Nike shoe that was his. He's making rap albums. This was in the era when every athlete wanted to be a rapper and every rapper wanted to be an athlete. He was one of the most famous faces in America, and really it was kind of Jordan and then Bo and Deion were right there underneath. So after his contract ran out with the Cowboys, Deion played with the Redskins, and he later came out of retirement. He'd retired for a couple years, I think, and he came out of retirement to play for the Baltimore Ravens in the early 2000s when he was something like 37 years old, and I believe he played safety for them, as a matter of fact. He left the game with everybody knowing that he was the greatest shutdown corner who had ever lived, and there's not really much dispute about that. He's the guy that made the term shutdown corner a household term for football fans. And, like I said earlier, it's a huge advantage of any team to know that one guy is completely taken out of the game plan at receiver and or one side of the field is completely out of play. And that's what Deion gave you. He played in 188 NFL games. He had 512 tackles, 53 interceptions. He had 9 return touchdowns. He had 19 non-offense related touchdowns, 8 Pro Bowls, 6 All Pros, as I said. And for the Major League Baseball career, he played in 641 games and finished with a 263 average. He had 558 hits, 39 home runs, 168 RBI, scored 308 runs, and stole 186 bases. He had a 320 on base percentage, and if you believe in the Moneyball philosophy, he got on base a pretty good amount of time, and his best season was that 92 season we talked about when he batted 304, had 8 home runs, 28 RBI, 26 stolen bases, and 14 triples that led the major leagues. And so his 533 average in the World Series plus 4 stolen bases were by far the best numbers the Braves had in a 6-game series that they ultimately lost to the Toronto Blue Jays. And out of everything else he did in the NFL, he also had, as a wide receiver, he had 60 receptions for 784 yards and 3 touchdowns on top of his defensive duties. And nowadays we have Travis Hunter out there trying to do both. So some people wonder what Deion ran. I don't know if I've mentioned it anywhere else in the podcast, but at the NFL Combine in '89, Deion ran a 4.27 40-yard dash, and you think, well, okay, that sounds fast, but how does that compare? Apparently, someone did the math and extrapolated that number out to 100 meters, and it would have been in the Carl Lewis type of speed. It was, apparently within a whisker of Carl Lewis Olympic speed if he could maintain that pace, which that's a big if, because obviously world-class track guys train differently. So if Deion could hold his pace, he would have been a Carl Lewis-esque speed demon. So there is that about his speed. The two-sport thing, there are others, and I will mention them on other podcasts, guys who kind of sort of got to this level. There's at least one more I'm going to talk about that did NFL and Major League Baseball, but there are other examples as well. But nobody did it like Deion and Bo for sure at those two levels that they did it in. So yeah, there's a few fun facts about him. I've already mentioned most of the only athlete to ever play in a Super Bowl and a World Series. Bo was the only athlete to play in the Major League All-Star Game and the Pro Bowl. He scored a touchdown 6 different ways: interception, return, punt return, kickoff return, receiving, rushing, and fumble return. And if I'm not mistaken, the rushing was a reverse that he took from when he played with the Cowboys. He took a reverse against either the Giants or the Eagles, I think, and scored on that. And he has a famous quote that it's kind of funny. He says, if you look good, you feel good. And if you feel good, you play good. And if you play good, they pay good. And, he was meticulous about his bandanas and sweatbands and things and when he played. And I've seen a picture before where he took his entire uniform and laid it out on the floor before a game in front of his locker so he could visualize from the socks to the helmet what he was going to look like that day and move things around and get everything coordinated just like he wanted it. I can't remember the occasion, but as far as his off the field stuff, I can't remember the exact occasion, but I think his junior or senior year when he played for Florida State, if I'm not mistaken, in the big game that year against Miami, he took a limousine to the game to let him out beside the stadium. I think that's what happened. Something in my brain tells me that happened. I could be wrong, but it seems like he took a limo to the game knowing the camera crews would be there. And I think he got out wearing like a suit and tie kind of thing, when college players didn't really necessarily have to do that. And so he's always known what his value would be on the market as a celebrity. He turned sports really into entertainment. He was one of the first that kind of commingled those worlds to the degree that he did. Every game kind of felt like an event as far as he was concerned. So there's plenty of Gen Xers that remember him, that will always remember him as Prime Time. And he was the guy that could steal the show any Sunday afternoon from any position on the field that he wanted to play. He could dominate. And really with baseball, I bet people are shocked to find out that he batted 500 in a postseason in a World Series and did that. But a few of the little trivial tidbits as well. He played for 4 Major League Baseball teams, originally with the Yankees, then he moved to the Braves. Then he played with the Cincinnati Reds, and then finally with the San Francisco Giants. He played in 641 games over 9 seasons. And like I said, he batted 533 in the World Series, led the Major League in triples one year. He was a two-time Super Bowl champion. Those were back-to-back seasons. He was NFL Defensive Player of the Year once. He was an 8-time Pro Bowler back when the Pro Bowl meant a lot more than it does now, and a 6-time first-team All-Pro. He had 53 career interceptions. There's guys that have more than that. That's not the point, though. He had 53 career interceptions, 9 defensive touchdowns, 6 punt return touchdowns, and 3 kickoff return touchdowns. He was inducted, as he should have been, into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2011. The thing about the 53 interceptions, you think, well, that's not as many as I would have thought he had. No, probably not. But you have to think about how no one threw at him either. There's stories about, I heard one of his defensive coordinators one time say that in the defensive meeting room all week, he was like, Deion could just sit there and read the sports page because all he needed to know was what numbered receiver I needed him to guard for the whole game, because you could zone up the rest of the field if you want to, and Deion could be a traveler, meaning he could just follow the Jerry Rice around the whole afternoon or whatever. So you had one guy you absolutely did not have to worry about on defense in football with Deion. So what do you think? When you think of Deion Sanders, what do you think about? The flash and the style, or the actual numbers and the substance behind the guy? He wasn't just any two-sport athlete. He was entertainment and an athlete. He will always be prime time to a whole generation of people. And now, of course, I'm not going to get into this aspect of it. There's not enough time. But now he's Coach Prime, and he's forging his way through college football as a coach at Colorado right now after a stint at Jackson State. So, Deion Sanders, it's hard to describe to kids now the cultural significance of some of the guys that I talk about. They know Michael Jordan, and they know Deion, and they know Bo Jackson, but I don't know if they truly understand the heights in which these guys ascended, in the sports world, and in the business worlds combined, in the sort of the high profile careers that they had. It's kind of hard to understand that, probably, that this was before the internet. These were guys that did their thing after cablevision had been invented and was in more households, and before the internet. And so it's really hard to imagine what kind of attention Deion would have gotten in the internet age as a player in his prime. So the numbers back it up. His Hall of Fame selection backs it up. Probably the best shutdown corner with just world-class speed, and just really, really smart player. Ask anyone who played with him, they'll tell you he was brilliant at playing defensive back. Just a phenomenal athlete that could play two sports. He even competed in a slam dunk competition, a celebrity pro athlete slam dunk competition that we'll eventually talk about as well. So he could do it all, truly. And, just some people didn't like his attitude and how he built himself. But if you think about today's athletes with social media, he was doing, as far as drawing attention to themselves and building the brand and all, he was doing this 40 years before these guys, and so there is a certain kind of brilliance in that for sure. So anyway, if you think of speed and you think of a guy who really knew what he was doing when it came to guarding wide receivers, and you think of a guy that was probably as fast as any human that ever played baseball could be, and out there, patrolling the outfield and stealing bases and stuff, Deion Sanders. And he did it at the absolute highest levels, and, a couple of Super Bowl rings and a Hall of Fame for his trouble. So that's it. There's so many details you could go into about the guy, but that is a reminder of some of the things that happened back in the day when Deion Sanders was ruling the NFL as a shutdown corner. And so, as always, I'm really, really appreciative of you spending your time listening to me talk about this stuff. And I really hope you will take the second to click like, click subscribe. You can leave a comment, whatever you want to do. And I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening, and we'll be back in a week.
Thank you for joining us on GenX Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.